now tapped in with the introspective father and son duo. Last name may be strange, but never strangers to the game. Adjust the listening devices and keep it loud.
Coming in, flex. I just wanna win, LABB, who we running with, 2233, I'm on 10 again, state your name.
Hello, and welcome to another installment of No Strangers to the Game. I'm Ja, and that's Troy. And I wanted to ask you, for this upcoming week, obviously we'll have Thanksgiving on Thursday and probably getting some time off from work. What are you most looking forward to for this upcoming week?
Well, most looking forward to just kind of relaxing as much as possible, being able to do a few things that I want to do, catch up on some reading and some research that I'm, trying to do for a few things that I'm doing outside of work. For instance, a project in a neighborhood, looking to do some revitalization and prevent, area being gentrified and having people displaced that are in that neighborhood. So it's a long term and it's a big project or big idea, but I'm looking to catch up on doing some research and trying to further the strategy to prevent that and revitalize that community. Spending time with family, you get up and your day just kind of goes by, you run in and, it's just your week, you wake up and it's Monday and next thing you know, it's Friday again because things are just moving so fast. So just some time to just kind of chill, not be rushed and, running around trying to, do so much. So for me, family, and obviously eating, and taking advantage of, some good food and just relaxing. That's pretty much what I'm looking to do. I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, for me, this upcoming week and this upcoming Thanksgiving is going to be the first time, by the time listeners hear this, it'll already have passed. But this will be my first Thanksgiving, not on my own. I'll have people here with me, but not with family. So that should be interesting. I ain't gonna do it up like, Granny or, all of our family would, but I'm planning on cooking a little something. Hopefully, having me a little something for Thanksgiving Day, and that'll be that. Watch some football, but I'm definitely excited to obviously have the week off. No school, still got to practice, but no school, just relaxing. Like you said, I think I got some assignments to catch up on and things to try to get going. But let's jump into it today. So today we're going to be discussing, I guess you could say, parenting, whether it be crazy parents, parents of successful children, so on and so forth. And we're really honing in on, those successful children and really breaking down what led to their success and how their parents played a role in it. So the first question I want to ask you is, what are the common characteristics of parents who raise successful kids?
Well, I can speak for myself. I think I've, to this point, raised some successful kids, yourself, your sister, and we're still in the process of raising Malia. So we 2 for 3 right now, so we're still working on the third. I think one has got to be probably the most important is sacrifice. Those times when you want to come home, relax, you got to either help with homework or you're driving to a practice or some event that takes, a couple of hours of your day, probably 2-3 times a week and weekend. So sacrifice is huge. I think discipline, making sure that, your kids or your children are disciplined and you as a parent being disciplined, getting up, staying on top of homework, and not just whatever activities you're doing, whether it be sports or dance or singing or whatever the case they may be doing. Making sure that they're taking care of business, doing chores at home, and they're having a normal, responsible childhood, making them responsible. And I think just being excited about what, the kids are doing and watching them to make sure that it's something that the child is having interest in and an aptitude to want to do. So the 2 big things I would say is sacrifice, the willingness to sacrifice, and to be disciplined, and I guess commitment will go in there as well to continue on down that path for several years to make sure that, you accomplish the goal at hand.
It's funny because I think in a lot of ways, and not all the time are the parents of successful children successful, in I guess the conventional sense. But I think one common thing you see is that parents of successful children tend to lead by example in some respect, whether it be, hey, my mom, she went to work every day. She worked hard. She, worked hard to provide for me and my siblings, yada, yada, yada. You hear those stories a lot where successful athletes or people in general tend to talk about how their parents showed them what it meant to work hard or what it meant to be disciplined and, strive for, better things, yada, 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 so on and so forth. And so that's one thing that I mean, from my perspective, I never raised kids, but just from hearing what people talk about, I think their parents oftentimes led by example. But that's not always the case, because I do think you have those kids who overcame, their parents, honestly, their parents' failures. Yeah, their parents' lack of discipline, lack of, all those other things. And maybe that's another, I guess not a common characteristic, but, another group that you can make is those kids who obviously, looked at what their parents did or how they behaved and said, I want to be different. I want to be the opposite, actually.
Right. Now, in your experience, you say you're talking about it from other people's experience. In your own life, I mean, you played football, you played sports, you had to do well in school, and you had, I wouldn't say we were strict, but we were disciplined enough to make sure that you and your sisters were able to accomplish the things that you needed to accomplish to put you on course to, be independent.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that you would say that you saw or experienced in your own growing up in this way?
Well, I think the best thing I got growing up, especially from you guys, was a good balance. I mean, you made sure I was doing well in school, but you didn't, beat me every day to make sure I came home with straight A's. You made sure I was working hard in sports, but it wasn't like, that was the only thing that mattered. And all those things, everything kind of had its place and its time, and it led me to, I think, be a more well-rounded person and be more balanced. And that's because I think that's what you guys were as well. We, as a family, were involved in a lot of things, in the community, whether it be through church or, doing things in our neighborhood, our, events or programs you guys were a part of, you and mom. You guys obviously both had jobs that you guys were, devoted to, made sure you guys went in every day. Y'all didn't sleep on the couch through a day of work. And so you showed me that discipline. So I think that's one thing I saw with you guys was balance. And I think, that's different than I think some of what we're talking about, those successful kids, because in I'm thinking about, I guess, specific examples when I say this, but I think sometimes you see with successful children is their parents put a lot of emphasis on one area. And that's why I think sometimes you see successful children have troubles outside of whatever it is that they're, really good at, whether it be music, a sport, whatever it is, because there's so much emphasis on that one area and they may not be as well-rounded. But I think for me personally, I got a really good balance growing up.
Yeah. And I would use the word highly successful. I mean, those that are famous, those that are in the public, the public arena, just recently witnessed, LeVar Ball, to have two sons drafted, in the top 3 in the first round. I mean, that's never been done. Yeah. And, I don't know him personally, but he's done something right. You look at his public, how he's viewed in the public and some of the things he may say or do, but you don't have sons that become that successful by you being some crazy nut job, and I think a lot of it is probably his public persona. And a lot of it, I think, is just part of his personality, but he had the right ingredients between him and his wife and whoever helped them with rearing their sons to be able to instill in work ethic, to be able to instill in them commitment, discipline, and the confidence to go out and take a shot at what they wanted to do. And it appears that him and his wife and their family got behind those boys and they sacrificed to make sure that they had every opportunity to be successful. So I think, highly successful people. And it seems to be, it seems like basketball is it, but when I'm looking at him and I'm looking at his young men, they seem to be engaged in other things, dabbling in business. I know Lonzo's looking to, is dabbling in rapping. But Melo, looks to be, trying to do his own thing as his own individual. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all, falls out. And I'm hoping that, that they could be, as successful as possible, because I think that's a good example. When we look at sports and particularly the Black dad and their involvement with their children and raising them. There's that, stigma, for so many years that the Black dad has been absent. Yeah. But I see more and more where there's a lot of Black dads, that are prevalent and that are help raising their children and doing a good job. So.
Yeah, it's funny because I watch their, they have a Facebook show that comes out on every Sunday. And I've been watching it since season 1. And I think one thing I picked up on is that, like you said, him and his wife are two very different people, and they're kind of the yin and yang as it, pertains to their personalities. And then I think that shows in raising their children. LeVar, part of that is he plays it up for the media, he does it up, but that is part of his personality. He's lively. He gonna talk his trash. He gonna, be confident, and he's gonna speak things into existence. And I think his wife is kind of, the opposite, where she's a little more quiet, reserved, but they're both competitive. They were both athletes. And so I think they, kind of instill that both in their kids, but neither of them are slouches. Neither of them, I think, were lazy or anything like that. I think LeVar is a dreamer. He dreams big, and, he talks a lot of stuff behind it. But I think he makes sure, and it honestly goes hand in hand, because you're talking all this, we got to get in the gym. We got to work just as hard to make sure we accomplish our goals, because we can't go out there talking all this mess and not live up to it. So I think he instills that in his boys. And, some of them have taken on the personality of him. Well, I don't think any of them have taken on the full personality of him. But I think you can see characteristics of him in all of his boys, as well as, his wife, Tina. But that's a good segue into my next question, and not necessarily specifically LeVar Ball, but when we talk about these highly successful kids and their parents being extremely involved in their success, do you think there's an element of those parents living vicariously through their children?
I think we all live through our children, regardless of how successful they are. Because for me, I see you guys as an extension of me. And so, when you're having great success, or when you're in a situation where you're not being successful, I still feel that, because, we care so much about you and want you to succeed and to live out your life and reach your potential. So for me, I think there may be some that maybe begin to look at almost taking on the life of that child, to the point of where they're pushing them beyond where the kid may want to go. So I think we all do. I think some may kind of push a little harder, and have a little more of what they want to see for themselves. And I think there may be some selfishness in that. But I think overall we do. We live vicariously through our children. It's just to what degree are we going to, function, and how much are we going to be involved? And is it going to be our decision, or is it going to be the decision of the child to do the things that they want to do? And so I think having a balance of pushing and living through them to a certain degree, but at the same time, they have the ultimate decision on, hey, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do this, but giving them those options and those opportunities to make some of those decisions on their own.
I wanted to talk to you about the balance between, like you talked about, I think every parent wants to see their kids do something great, be successful at something. But I think more than anything, good parents want to see their children live happily, right? Whatever that may entail for that kid specifically. Where do you find the balance between, I think there's a societal pressure of, obviously you got to go get a job, you got to make a living, you got to do this, that, and the other. How do you react? And I don't think you've had this specific, scenario, but how do you react if your kid says, I don't want to do any of that, and I'll be just happy being a bum? Where do you find the line of allowing your kid to explore himself, be happy with what makes them happy, but also making them understand that society's going to treat you a certain way, and you're going to have to kind of function within society to be, a functioning human being?
Well, I don't know how to really answer that question. I want you guys to be happy doing whatever you do. I don't believe any of us come here to say I want to be a bum. We may just get frustrated with the circumstances and how we view society and decide we want to check out in that way. But for me, with you guys, I've always watched you from an early age and see what you guys were drawn to and what you guys were interested in. And I try to, push you in that direction and allow you to be engaged in whatever that was. Like for your sister, Tia, she was always into art. She was into music, singing, and those type of things. And we noticed that she had a talent for that. And so we put her in programs and activities that would allow her to do those things. With you were a little harder because you didn't show a lot of interest in a whole lot. It was just like, whatever, Jai, you want to do this? Yeah, whatever, So I kind of had to watch you to see what your interest was. The first thing I found from you is that you had really kind of a business mind, even though, you kind of grew to like sports. But I think business was one of the first things I saw that you seemed to have a real interest in. You perked up. I mean, I remember, I think it was 6th grade, you wanted an iPod or something. And you know how you did things. If you did enough to stay out of trouble, but you weren't going to put a whole lot of energy in it. So you said, well, Dad, I want an iPod. And I said, okay, here's the deal. You can get an iPod. I think I said I'll pay half, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, but here's the deal. You got to get straight A's. And I knew that you can get straight A's because I'd never seen you do homework and you come in with B's and A's. And I'm just like, wait a minute, if he put some effort into this, he can really be much better. And so the contract was throughout middle school, you had to get straight A's and you had to keep them. It wasn't just get straight A's and then I'm going to go ahead and once I get my iPod, I'm going to go back to doing business as usual. And so it was funny because you went and researched and you drew up a little contract and I was like, oh, okay. So that was, I thought that was pretty cool. And then when I saw you kind of, particularly with Tony, for those who don't know, Tony Riggins, our cousin, who's a former general manager for the Angels. When he became the general manager and we would go to some of the games, you would go and be able to sit in his office and talk to him and meet some of the players in the locker room and just have that experience. I really saw that was something that you had a real interest in and you were, it excited you. That's the first time I saw you really get excited about something. And, I knew that you would be somewhere in business. I remember you had various business ventures on your own that you had, from selling Takis at school to Gatorade and, whatever else you was doing to get your hustler. I think selling phones.
I think, okay, to in terms of my business mind, I think I understood at a very young age the value of money and what it provided. Access allowed you to do nothing if you wanted, and it allowed you to do whatever you wanted, if that's what you please. And so at a very young age, I decided that that's what I wanted. And business was, obviously revolving around money. And so I think I naturally, as we've seen, I like to not necessarily argue, but negotiate. I like to, make deals. I like to do all those things. So business is something that comes naturally to me. And with Tony, obviously I've had a passion for playing sports. And even more so than playing sports, I think I had a passion for analyzing and watching sports at a very young age too. So when you combine those two passions, I think that's where you get, the career fit I'm trying to get into is the business of sports. What was I going to say? But I think I often think about, it's something I randomly or weirdly think about at times is I was like, I think I could have been an amazing baseball pitcher, right? I think I have a great arm. I'd have threw 95 to 100. I'd have probably been able to pick up how to throw different pitches, sliders, breaking ball, anything like that. I think I would have been a great pitcher. I played baseball one season and I never played again because I was really bored of it. I often think, what if you had forced me to stay in baseball, right? And now by 22 years old, I may be a pitcher in the major leagues making a couple million, or something like that. I think I would often wonder sometimes, do the ends justify the means when it comes to this style of parenting if it pays off the way it does? for instance, LeVar, let's say LaMelo was not interested in basketball at all, but, he's going to be 6'7", and he has a natural talent, for passing the basketball and scoring the basketball. Hey, man, we can go make millions and millions and millions of dollars if you just, grind this out and do this to the age of 25, so to speak. Is that the right way to go about things if, that's the end result?
Well, it also depends on not just, the financial gains of success. It comes down to ultimately, is this going to lead to your happiness? Because ultimately, we want our children to be happy. We want to be happy. You've had many athletes that go and they were successful and in their sport, but they were so unhappy with life. And, they ended up after, they finished playing, doing some things that led to them getting into a lot of trouble, drugs, jail, and crimes that you hear. And even many of them went broke. So I knew, because you in some ways were a lot like me, if I didn't want to do it, I'm not doing it. I may do enough to get by to keep you from bothering me, but I'm not going to put a whole lot of time and energy into it. And I realized that with you real young, I was like, this dude right here, if he don't want to do it, man, we just going to be at odds. And I just couldn't see myself fighting with you for the next 10, 15 years on doing something you had no desire to do. And so I just said, allow you to pick and choose the things you want to do and try to nurture that by allowing you the opportunities to engage in it and be involved where you wanted to and make those choices. Like, for instance, you were playing football. You decided one year you didn't want to play. I know a lot of dads would have said, you playing. I was like, well, if you don't want to play, we ain't got to play, because I got to spend time and energy going out there. And I know me, if I'm going out there and you just, haphazardly doing stuff, we're going to have a problem. I could be doing something else instead of sitting out here watching you do nothing. And so always wanted you guys to be involved and engaged in the decisions you make about your life, because ultimately it's your life. And there's times, obviously, when you had to do things whether you wanted to or not, because it was in your best interest. But as far as your career and things you wanted to pursue, I wanted to make sure that was something that you had a desire to do and be involved in.
So where do you draw that line? Because you obviously, so, we used to go back and forth on me doing certain things that I didn't necessarily want to do. But one thing you and Mom instilled in me at a young age was, if you start something, you finish it, right? You don't quit. You don't stop halfway through. Where do you draw that line of making sure your kid finishes it if they're doing something that you find that's not something they want, or it's not something that is making them happy? How do you find that line to where you want to show them that when you start something, you finish it, you don't quit? But if you can see that it's really, starting to affect your child, where do you draw that line?
Well, I always look at a starting point. Like, if you say, I want to play baseball, okay, you're going to start, there's a season. When the season over, if you want to play again, we can do it. If you don't, cool. If there's whatever it was you're doing, you're going to finish that season out, or that term, whatever it may be, to where at least you can get a chance to see if I really like it. Because sometimes you'll start something and it may not start out the way you want. It may be more difficult, but as you begin to learn and become more engaged in it, you find an appreciation for it. So I at least want you to go through the process of seeing it through, and then you can determine based on your experience with it that it is or isn't something I want to do. But not because the first time I do it, it wasn't good, or it wasn't fun for me, then I quit. It was just like, you're going to see it through and you're going to learn, and then you can decide from that based on what you know of it, not one incident or one short experience, and then you throw it all away because you had one bad experience.
Yeah. So getting back on the track of like parents who have raised successful kids, for instance, LeVar Ball and let's say Serena and Venus Williams' father, Richard Williams. A lot of times they're outspoken, they're confident, and in these two particular cases, they're Black. What do you think are the main reasons people don't like these figures? Because they have not, been liked by media or, a lot of people in the public.
Well, I think in our society, in most instances, people don't like people who they would consider arrogant or, highly confident. And then when it comes to, being Black men, speaking out the way that they do, particularly Richard in the sport that his daughters played, it was very few blacks and very, very few in that instance where he was coming through the ranks with them. And for him to be as confident and say some of the things he said, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think it's just that our society wants you to fit in this box, into this mold, and to be humble, and to, you know, be thankful and grateful for your opportunity, which is good. But also with these guys, they created a market for their children and themselves, because they were polarizing figures. And, you know, those are people, some people love them and some people love to hate them. Yeah. And so, but to answer your question, I think largely because of our society, we're typically taught to be humble. And then, you know, a black man, and traditionally with our society and the issues we've had with discrimination, you know, throughout our history, you know, it was looked upon even more negatively because of that. So I think those are two things that, you know, in my mind, is why they looked upon the way they have been.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I'm mainly taking from athletes. You're right. I think people that are considered arrogant a lot of times catch a lot of flack in the public eye. But I think sometimes hindsight is 20/20 too. You know, when it ends up working out, people love you, right? I mean, I wasn't there in the moment, but I would imagine there were some mixed feelings about Joe Namath, you know, calling himself winning the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? I'm pretty sure people were like, that's arrogant, or, you know, people may have had mixed feelings about it, but he went and won the Super Bowl, so what could you say? And so I think with some of these dads, you know, like LeVar calling it, both of my boys going to get drafted in the top 5, or they're going to be, you know, top 3 picks in the draft. And it's like, well, I mean, at the moment, it's like, man, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. But here we are. He's got 2 kids that were drafted top 3 in 2 separate drafts. And so I think sometimes hindsight can change people's opinions on it.
Well, what did you tell them about your experience meeting Patrick Mahomes' dad when you were working at the baseball organization, MLB program, and he came and he was talking about how great his son was going to be, and you guys were looking at him like, who is this dude?
Yeah, and like, once again, that's hindsight 20/20. It was the year before Patrick Mahomes was going to start. I mean, that standout year where he won MVP. So he had never started a game in the NFL, and we were at an MLB camp. His dad was an MLB pitcher, so he was at the camp. And we were talking to him about his son. We knew who Patrick Mahomes was, but we weren't thinking he was about to do what he was about to do. And so we said, you know, how do you, you know, he had been named the starter for the upcoming season. We said, how do you feel about your son, you know, starting the season? He said he's going to be the best quarterback in football. And I think we looked at it and we were like, half of it was, you know, what can you expect from a parent, right? You know, we understand you're going to say that, but the other half of it was like, no, that's not going to happen. You know, he first year starter. And I don't know if he knew it per se, but whether or not he did, he was right about it. His son was the best quarterback in football, and I believe has been since then. But I think it's an interesting thing to, like we talk about. I mean, we're talking about speaking into existence, but it's interesting when you're speaking it into existence for other people. I want to ask you about that because, like you said, your kids are sometimes an extension of yourself. So for LeVar or Richard Williams or, you know, Patrick Mahomes Sr. go out on a limb and say these things about not themselves, but their children. What is that like? Do you put more pressure on your kids, or do you just have the confidence that they, you know, are going to do what they're supposed to do?
I think you have the confidence. You know your kid. You know, and you've seen the competition. You go around and you've been around it long enough. If you have a kid that's playing at that level, you know, you've seen who the guys were or the people that they were going to be competing against. You see their strengths, their weaknesses, and you see and you know your own child, what their strengths, their weaknesses are, and their potential. And I think we can, for the most part, predict kind of where you're going to land on some level, that you're going to be competitive because I know your size, whether it be, you know, the things that you do. For you, for instance, track and field, we can look at and compare you to other great jumpers. You know, what are their speeds, you know, in terms of their ability to run 100? You know, what are their times? What were they jumping in college at certain levels in high school? What was their progression like? And to begin to compare and say, you know what, based on what I've seen with them, you have the ability to do these things. And if you feel confident in the conditioning and training and the preparation that they're getting, and you know that I have the best person training them, then yeah, I'll go on a limb and say, yeah, based on what I've seen and based on history, I'm gonna predict and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, hey, my son's gonna be an Olympian. And so I don't know if it puts any more pressure on the kid, but I think as a parent, you want to instill that confidence that, you know, we're gonna go out and do this. You may not say it, but I can say it.
I think it's, I mean, you know, you're talking about people who analyze draft picks from the age of 15 or, you know, analyze recruits and rank them and stuff like that. I mean, at the same time, I mean, parents have that same ability to view the field, like you said, but they get an even closer look into their child's psyche and stuff like that. And in some cases, though, I think it may be able to cloud the judgment a little bit. You know, obviously you want your kid to be successful, but nonetheless, I think if you can look at it objectively, you can make a good prediction because you have a front row seat to your child's development. So to wrap it up today, I wanted to ask you, I kind of want to make this two-part. Give me some of the keys. We talked about some of the common characteristics. Give me some of the keys that you've seen throughout history to raising the highly successful children. You know, those kids that we talk about are, you know, famous or wealthy or, you know, probably the best in their field, so to speak. And then give me a few keys to raising, I mean, just kids that are going to be functioning members of society, be able to make a living and be happy, so to speak. What would you say are the keys to those two different, you know, upbringings?
Well, I think the difference between the two is really consistency. We all as parents, regardless of what our children do, for the most part, most parents are going to instill discipline. You got chores, you got things that you have to do on a consistent basis, right? You want to make sure you're going to school, you get grades. If you're competing in a sport or whatever activity, you got to practice. You got to go do those things. For me as a parent is, like I said, the sacrifice. I have to make sure that, hey, I could be sitting at home on the couch with my feet up, but I'm standing out there at a practice or at a game watching you or coaching or whatever the case may be so that you could get that. And then persistence, you know, persistence and making sure that, you know, we do it. We're going to do it even when we don't feel like doing it. And that the repetition of that. I think the difference is between those that are highly successful and those that kind of, you know, just fall into society is the persistence and the consistency in which the parents enforce that those actions or those activities that their children would do on a repetitive basis. And then it becomes natural for that kid to be able to go out and do those things, even when their parents are not standing there telling them to do it. It becomes a habit for them. So I think those are the things in my mind that separates those highly successful, I mean, other than just genetically more talented and born with genes and the aptitude to do those things, but the consistency in which the parents enforce those activities.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note that success is oftentimes defined by our society as, like I said, being famous or wealthy or, you know, whatever it may be. But I think it's important to define your own success and know what's going to make you happy. And what you'll consider a success for you is what you should strive for, not necessarily what society says success is. So I think that's important to note. But unless you have any last words, I think that'll wrap it up for this episode.
Nah, good show. I appreciate the conversation and I look forward to next week. And, you know, this week, enjoying the time with family and relaxing as much as I can and being somewhat productive in that way.
Well, by the time you guys listen to this, it'll be past Thanksgiving. So we hope you had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. And we appreciate you tuning in, and make sure you tune in next week.
Peace.
Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified every time we post a video.